5. Number 2 on the list of obligatory games to have on every list like this, but no less deserving. And before any of you hipster asses come out of the woodwork and declare it overrated, A, you're wrong, and B, you're not cool for being different. But the game in question is the eternally bonkers Metal Gear Solid. It's hard for me to really put into words why this game is simply a masterpiece, but I think it comes down to the fact that it's one of the best written stories in video game history, riding the line between self-aware camp and heart-wrenching drama, and it's so tightly written, not a single moment is wasted, but every moment has the proper impact, and regardless of if you played any games before or after, MGS1 felt like a gratifyingly complete experience. Which makes sense, because for all Hideo Kojima knew, this was going to be the last one, and so he went all out to make it a truly climactic and complete experience that played off every major point it had, which Metal Gear Solid did to a T. And it has all of the proper peaks and troughs, escalation, likable deep characters and twists, which define the best stories and is frankly fucking nuts in the best way possible. But with the limitations of the PS1, it had a perfect balance of gameplay and story unlike later games. And let's not count out the gameplay, which can be very unique and surreal, but it keeps it to mostly the explorative action stealth which defines the series. It's streamlined perfectly and always feels great to outsmart the guards. The combat's tight, the boss fights are all unique and varied, Shadow Moses Island is iconic and memorable, and between the tense combat, the sneaky stealth action, and the tight memorable level design, it really does encapsulate the tactical espionage action amazingly. It's a shame the MGS series has ended the way it did. Hashtag fuck Konami, lest we forget. 4. I remember one time watching an hour-long special on like MTV or something ranking the top 50 metal bands in history. Now, when it comes to metal, it has what we call the big three, where regardless of the impact of any other band, these three must place at the top of every list because their impacts are simply unmatchable. So the most interesting debate usually centers around who is the fourth best. I have a similar thing with my top 3 PS1 games. They're simply on another level and can't be dethroned. So my challenge was figuring out what my Iron Maiden was, the number 4 on that specific list, or rather, what's the best non-big 3 game for me, and I couldn't not have it be anything but what is possibly my most all-time replayed game, SPYRO 2 RIPTO'S Rage. While it may have a few issues, like a slightly weak villain, fight me, or a few bullshit minigames, there's no denying this game's quality. Taking the formula and base built in Spyro the Dragon and masterfully expanding upon it, introducing a new, more complex story with reoccurring characters, personalities, and motivations, adding to and refining the gameplay with much more smooth, free-flowing controls that made the most out of the hardware, as well as bonkers amounts of new gameplay modes and abilities, providing a million new opportunities for expansive and varied fun gameplay. It took everything from Spyro the Dragon and kicked it up a notch. From the flights, now speedways, to the extra activities, to the art design, to the basic act of collecting and exploring with new collection mechanics that made it all the more fun to seek out collectibles and explore the wide open, vastly different levels. New and improved boss fights and minigames, minigames, minigames. There were so many new ideas that RIPTO'S Rage was just crammed. Every single level had something new to do that integrated into the core gameplay perfect and never felt arbitrary. Being the Iron Maiden of a list like this is nothing to be ashamed of. RIPTO'S Rage is a bona fide classic. 3. It's no doubt in my mind that when it comes to the Crash Bandicoot games, I don't like the platforming games as much as I feel I should, as you could probably tell by the fact that only one of them broke the top 10, but when it comes to Crash Bandicoot games, what I believe to be the magnum opus is not a platforming game, but rather a racing game, or should I say, the racing game. Crash Team Racing. It's hard to really nail down what makes this game amazing because the answer really is everything. Graphically stunning, managing to do something that Mario Kart 64 couldn't, render everything in full 3D without the console exploding, which they did to perfection, and while they were at it, make every environment vibrant and colorful. It has a huge amount of content to play around with, including a full, and might I add, extensive single-player story mode, which squeezes massive variance out of the 18 maps, and encourages replayability while keeping every run-through different, but doesn't even come close to neglecting multiplayer. It's one of the few games where I can say you will enjoy the single player just as much as the multiplayer. The controls are straight up perfect, allowing for skill and technique while also being accessible to the average person, always feeling like you're in controls with the weighty driving physics, an assortment of fun characters and weapons that call back to previous games, and are fun, challenging, and rewarding to unlock. Fun and replayable in every sense of the word. The most tightly controlled, precise driving game I've ever played, robust both in single player and multiplayer content without either seeming like an afterthought. It's simply a perfect racing game, and this was Naughty Dog's last Crash game, and seemingly a celebration of the series they created as a final goodbye with all the callbacks to previous games. And as poignant as that is, I couldn't think of a better way for Naughty Dog to say goodbye. A celebration of characters, a celebration of locations, and a celebration of their creation, the thing that put them on the map. And in that celebration and final goodbye came what is, in my opinion, Naughty Dog's greatest game to date. Naughty Dog's magnum opus. And yes, that includes The Last of Us. 2. I'm not the biggest fan of JRPGs, as you know. It's hard to impress me when I find so many of them boring, derivative, pretentious, incoherent, and for the lack of a better term, too anime for me. But there are a few JRPGs that get past my initial gag reflex. Kingdom Hearts, for example. I fucking hate the main characters and the overarching plots are impenetrable, but solid gameplay and nostalgia for Disney make it tolerable. Or Final Fantasy XII, once again with two fucking insufferable main leads that the plot's barely focused on, instead opting to be focused on the actual likable, sympathetic, not insufferable characters like Ash, Bosch, or Balthier. In fact, why wasn't Balthier the main character? I'm definitely not the JRPG target audience, which is why it's all the more surprising that I straight up adore The Legend of Dragoon. Truly, it transcends genre. A fantastic story with deep, likable personalities that each have a chance to be fleshed out and developed, and might I add, are adults, with conflicting morals, and any angst is subdued and feels organic from people who are likable and feel justified in their inner conflicts, making them feel real and sympathetic. A late cycle game, which means one of the most genuinely beautiful games on the system, one of the most organic feeling relationships in the history of video games, and once again, the story, which is half the pie, is fantastic. Well written, paced deep, and establishes a lore, history, and universe ripe for expanding upon, and keeps you guessing as the stakes ramp up and the characters develop in sync with the escalation of stakes and knowledge of what's going on. Between the genuinely likable, sympathetic characters, both main cast and minor characters, and the plot, which is not only coherent and fleshed out, but well written, and I mean, it's one of the best written stories of any game I've ever played. Seriously compelling, heartfelt, and just so powerful every second of the upwards of probably 70 hours of gameplay. That alone puts it in a league of its own when it comes to JRPGs, but it's also one of the few examples in the genre with interesting, fun gameplay with the addition system that escalates and rewards skill, timing, and patience, and the soundtrack, which I've gone on record as saying is the greatest soundtrack to any game I've ever played, and you have the one JRPG that truly transcends the genre for me. Maybe it's not as popular or well-liked because it does a lot of things different than the traditional JRPG, but that's exactly what I love about it. When I think of games as art, The Legend of Dragoon is the first thing I think of. From top to bottom, The Legend of Dragoon truly is legendary. Number 1. I won't deny that this list probably got predictable by the end, but sometimes predictability is deserved because sometimes there can only be one true answer, and I've hawked this game up relentlessly for years. So, without further ado, my favorite PS1 game, what I believe to be the magnum opus of the PlayStation library, step right up, Bubsy 3D. Nah, I'm just kidding, it's Spyro 3. Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon isn't just what I believe to be the greatest PS1 game, but it's also one of my favorite games of all time. 3 separate reviews, and I still don't think I've done it proper justice. But in short, possibly the best looking game on the system with dozens of unique animations, characters, worlds, beautifully varied in every way, arguably Stuart Copeland's best soundtrack ever, and one I'll pop on every now and again just because I get the urge to listen to it. It's that good. The most dense gameplay world yet, with all the collecting, exploring, and combat you've come to expect, refined and polished to a T, making it the most stimulating, absorbing, and addicting game in the series. And on top of the base gameplay being better than ever, and having just as much, maybe more of the base gameplay that we've come to love in the games overall, you have a significant amount of varying modes and marginally different core gameplay modes, but they all still feel like Spyro, Bentley notwithstanding. And then you have the great minigames with all the fun of RIPTO'S Rage with a much more fair and consistent difficulty. Yes, even Yeti boxing, because it's easy as fuck if you know what you're doing. Simply put, you have just as much of the gameplay that you've come to love with so much more added on that fixed all of the issues, as minuscule as they may have been, from RIPTO'S Rage. Couple that with easily the best story in the trilogy, a clear, unambiguous goal, a threatening villain that consistently throws obstacles in your way, has a clear stated goal and means to get there, and affects the plot directly, causing all of the grief and antagonism top to bottom. And not only that, but this also has the best arcs in the series, with Hunter, Bianca, and Spyro working off all each other and growing as characters as a result. Bianca especially is a standout in this game. As a whole, it's simply everything that made the first two games great turned up to 100%. 100. Everything I loved about the previous games is here, plus so much more, with none of the issues from the previous games. It's the most refined experience in one of my favorite franchises ever. Does it have its issues? Absolutely, but taken as a whole, it's everything I love with none of the major issues that harmed the previous games. It's as close as you can possibly get to a perfect Spyro game. And you know, we all have our favorites. New, old, well-known, obscure, all different genres, playstyles, soundtracks, nostalgic, unnostalgic, but at the end of the day, we're just people who love video games. Dare I say it? Love art. And whether you prefer Overwatch, Firewatch, or Game & Watch, at the end of the day, we're just people looking to have a little fun or whatever other emotional high we seek in video games. And it's all right there at the click of a button. So whether you prefer Commodore 64, N64, or PS4, whether you prefer Xbox One or PS1, or whatever else you may enjoy, it's always nice to go back to an old favorite. Each one of these games I would go back to and have a blast. And while the perfect game may never exist, I'll be sure to enjoy looking regardless. Just as I'm sure you will too. Thanks for watching. TGX over, out, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and enable notifications.